There are things we don't plan to say. Not because we're afraid, not because we don't know the words, but because we believe timing matters and we keep waiting for the right moment. We tell ourselves later, we tell ourselves when things are clearer. We tell ourselves when I've thought this through completely, and for a long time that feels responsible. But then one day, silence starts to feel heavier than truth. That's when you know something has shifted. I didn't plan to say this, not tonight, not like this. But there comes a point where holding something back no longer feels mature, it feels dishonest. And honesty, when it's real, doesn't always arrive with preparation. Sometimes it arrives with clarity. For most of my life, I believed that strength meant control. Control over decisions, control over outcomes, control over words. I believed that if you spoke only when everything was perfectly organized in your mind, you were being responsible, strategic, intelligent. And that belief served me well, until it didn't. Because clarity doesn't always announce itself ahead of time. Sometimes it shows up quietly in the middle of an ordinary moment, and you realize, if I don't say this now, I may never say it honestly. This isn't drama. This isn't impulse. This is what happens when you stop avoiding a truth just because it wasn't scheduled. There's a difference between reacting and responding to something you finally understand. What I'm saying tonight doesn't come from emotion running wild. It comes from emotion being fully understood. There's a calm that comes with real honesty. Not the kind that seeks validation, not the kind that demands agreement, but the kind that simply stands. I've learned that the strongest statements aren't loud. They don't rush. They don't persuade. They exist whether anyone applauds or not. Many people confuse silence with maturity. But silence can also be avoidance. And maturity, real maturity, is knowing when staying quiet is no longer respectful to yourself. I know there are women listening tonight who understand this deeply. Women who have spent years choosing patience, choosing grace, choosing understanding. Women who didn't speak every thought because they valued harmony more than expression. And while that strength is real, so is the moment when you realize I've been quiet long enough. This isn't about confrontation, it's about presence. About standing in what's real without needing to explain it away. Some truths don't need to be polished. They just need to be spoken calmly. I didn't plan to say this because planning would have softened it, and this didn't need to be softened. It needed to be honest. When silence becomes heavier than truth, the body knows before the mind catches up. I didn't plan to say this because planning would have softened it, and this didn't need to be softened. It needed to be honest. When silence becomes heavier than truth, the body knows before the mind catches up. There's a kind of courage that doesn't look like courage at all. It doesn't raise its voice. It doesn't demand attention. It doesn't come with dramatic gestures or emotional intensity. It's quiet, and because it's quiet, most people underestimate it. But this kind of courage is rare. It's the courage to speak without performance. We live in a world that rewards presentation. Say it confidently, but not too honestly. Be vulnerable, but only in ways that are palatable. Share your truth, but make sure it lands well. That's not truth, that's strategy. And there's nothing wrong with strategy until it replaces sincerity. What I'm saying now isn't crafted to impress you. It isn't designed to persuade. It's not here to be liked. It's here because it's real. Speaking without performance means you accept the outcome before you speak. You don't control how it's received. You don't manage reactions. You don't adjust yourself mid-sentence to make it easier for someone else. You simply stand in what's true, calmly. That's not recklessness, that's emotional discipline. For a long time, I believed that timing was everything, and timing does matter. But there's another truth we don't talk about enough. Sometimes the right time isn't when conditions are perfect. Sometimes the right time is when your honesty becomes unavoidable. There's a voice many women rarely hear, especially later in life. A man who doesn't rush, who doesn't posture, who doesn't speak to dominate the moment. A voice that says, I'm not here to convince you, I'm here to be real. That voice doesn't try to win. It tries to align. Mature love doesn't ask for performance, it asks for presence. It doesn't need grand declarations, it needs steady truth. If you've ever felt tired of surface-level connection, if you've ever felt that conversations stay polite but never real, if you've ever wished someone would just say the thing that matters without turning it into a spectacle, then you understand why this matters. Underscore. The courage to speak from the heart isn't emotional chaos. It's emotional clarity. It's knowing exactly what you feel and not being afraid of its simplicity. Some truths don't sound dramatic. They sound quiet. They sound like, this matters to me. I needed to say this. I didn't plan it, but I know it's right. Underscore. And when those words are spoken calmly, without pressure, without urgency, without demand, they land deeper. Because they aren't trying to go anywhere. They're simply being placed where they belong. Underscore. There is strength in restraint. But there is also strength in release. Knowing the difference is maturity. Underscore. Tonight isn't about changing anything. It's about honoring something. The truth that waited long enough. There's a quiet peace that comes after truth is spoken. Not relief, not celebration. Peace. The kind that settles into your body slowly like the end of a long day. Underscore. When you finally say what wasn't planned, something unexpected happens. You stop negotiating with yourself. You stop replaying conversations in your mind. You stop wondering what if, because even if the outcome is uncertain, you are not. That's the gift of honesty. It doesn't guarantee understanding. It guarantees alignment. Underscore. For women who have spent years holding space for others, listening, supporting, waiting. There is something deeply reassuring about a man who speaks clearly without pressure, who doesn't rush you to respond, who doesn't demand resolution, who simply says what's true and allows silence to exist afterward. That's not emotional distance, that's emotional respect. Underscore. Some truths are meant to be spoken not to create movement, but to create stillness. A moment where nothing needs to be fixed, nothing needs to be decided, nothing needs to happen next. Underscore. This is the kind of honesty that doesn't chase. It doesn't pull, it doesn't cling, it stands. And when truth stands calmly, it invites the same calm in others. Underscore. If you're listening tonight as the day winds down, if the noise is finally quiet, if you're reflecting on things you haven't said, let this remind you, honesty doesn't need perfection. It doesn't need the right words. It needs presence. Underscore. Some truths arrive late, not because they were avoided, but because you needed to become someone capable of speaking them without fear. Underscore. When truth is spoken from emotional maturity, it doesn't disrupt peace. It creates it. Underscore. You don't need to say everything, but what you do say should be real, and when it is, you can rest. Underscore. This wasn't planned, but it needed to be heard.